Previously on Chaos Head Noah. Upon saying those words, Kosei felt an immense sense of fear, one that told her she truly did not know the answer. A girl with the same face as hers addressed her from the other side of the mirror. Ever since that day, Kosei could no longer speak, and she was unable to look at herself in the mirror. Even still, the question of "who are you" would continue to assault her. She did not even know whose voice it was inside her head anymore. And due to another facet of her peculiar ability, much akin to a broken fax machine, Kosei would receive the voices of other people indiscriminately, regardless of if she desired to or not. She herself had no say in the matter. And thus, Kosei's mind was torn to shreds.
お前が望むと望まないとに関わらず、もしこれ以上踏み込んでくるような、負を正にするぐらいの強い意識を持つんだな。中途半端な気持ちじゃ、妄想に食われるだけだぞ。
I didn't want to get involved in anything that sounded dangerous, so I opted not to ask anything else. Besides, I still didn't know how far I'd have to go to get my hands on a D-sword. I was no hero, just a useless piece of shit that couldn't even protect his own sister. But it was also possible that Shogun could show up again. He seemed to be playing with me like it was some kind of a game after all. Maybe he'd feel like sending me another quest soon. Just the thought alone terrified me. I tried to grasp my D-sword, but even that was just to protect myself from him. Without that sword, how could I ever hope to escape his evil clutches? I still hadn't sat down. I'd just frozen with my head hanging down. I was so happy. I'd gone to see her again.
ちょっとタク、どうしたの？もしかして泣いてるの？
Because you kept breaking your promise. That's why. Even a freaking hard ass like me would end up crying after having someone break their promise to me this long. I frantically shook my head. If my Dokyun classmates found I was crying, they'd start making fun of me all over again. I told myself that I couldn't cry, but the tears kept flowing.
わかった。私に再会できて嬉しいんだ。そうでしょ。
Well, at least you can see it.
なんてね。ちょっと自意識過剰だったかな。
Even as she joked around so cheerfully, all I could do was continue shaking my head. I couldn't even look at her. If I did, I knew I'd really start bawling.
まったく。老人たちの相手は面倒ですよ。そう思いませんか？彼らは臆病すぎる。だからこそここまでのし上がってきたとも言えるのでしょうが。利用するにもこうあれこれと横槍を入れられてはいい加減うんざりしてきますよ。現実は悲しいかな。300人委員会の影響力というものを侮ることはできません。ただいずれ近いうちにそのシステムも崩壊する。世界の支配構造は組み替えられる。楽しみですか？私もですよ。ここまで随分時間がかかってしまいました。プロジェクトノア。立ち上げからすでに5年余り。まさか君がギガロマニアックスだとは思いもよりませんでした。どうやら神すらも私の味方をしてくれているようだ。君のサンプルを取らせてもらいますよ。何？怯える必要はありません。 私は元医師でしてね、インフォームドコンセントはきちんとしなければ気が済まないたちなのです。そもそもノア2のハードウェアはすでに完成しています。あと必要なのはソフトウェアの方でしてね。
ソフトウェア。
そのために君たちギガロマニアックスのサンプルが多く必要なのです。正確に言うならば NA シナプスに関するコードサンプル、脳の働きに指令を出す役割を果たしている部位の行動サンプルですよ。コードサンプルには個人差があります。持っている能力が高いギガロマニアックスは NA シナプスもより活性化し、脳のより広い範囲にわたって効果を及ぼします。人間の脳は全体の10分の1しか使われていません。しかしギガロマニアックスは違う。
Upon viewing it up close, the Shibuyan nightscape was the essence of vulgarity itself, leaving Narose solely with feelings of discomfort. His persistent belief of this remote location, however, was that it was more than adequate. Nevertheless, it would not be long before this nightscape would be a sight never to be seen again. The final experiment of his Project Noah would make sure of that.
世界が生まれ変わる日も近い。
最初はミヤちゃんの事件の知らせを受けた日はそれでも泣いていたんです。お父さんもお母さんもとても辛そうでした。でも次の日の朝、なぜか2人は楽しそうに笑っていたんです。ミヤちゃんが死ぬ前と全く同じに戻ってたんです。たった1日で。私わけが分からなくて、2人はミヤちゃんのこと忘れようとしてるんじゃないかって思って。
Or maybe something made them forget Mia?
そうしたらお父さんが笑いながら「お前に妹なんていないよ」って。ミヤちゃんが残した洋服とか靴とかを見せても全然取り合ってくれないんです。それはお前のために予備で買ってあったものだって。そうやってお父さんたちはニュースからも警察の話からも目を背けて、記憶からミヤちゃんのことを消し去ろうとしてるんです。
Fascinating.
ニュージェネ第7の事件が起きたんすよ。
Bond's eyes opened wide, and his expression turned bitter as his teeth sank into his lip. Sensing the seriousness of the situation from his behavior, Momose Niwa watched the detective with unease.
外車は3人、友人同士らしいっす。
3.
3人とも胴体から体が切断されてて、
What?
それぞれの上半身と下半身を別々に入れ替えて手ぐす、釣りとっすね。それで縫い付けられてたっす。それと額にそれぞれ Q、D、N って読める傷が。
Dokyun?
何かのメッセージか。
今日午前4時50分ごろ、東京都渋谷区の線路沿いで男性3人の他殺死体が鉄柱に吊り下げられているのを通りかかった新聞販売員の男性が発見しました。警察の調べによりますと、殺されたのはいずれも渋谷区に住む無職藤田康平さん、大学生の安沢三郎さん、とび職の高木亮さんの3人です。3人とも胴体の部分が切断され、それぞれの上半身と下半身が別々に入れ替えられて糸で縫合されていました。3人の額にはそれぞれ謎の傷がつけられており、警察では犯人からのメッセージではないかとみて調べています。渋谷では2ヶ月ほど前から猟奇殺人事件が頻発しており、警察では今回の事件も同一犯による犯行の可能性が高いとみて 捜査を続けています。
At the end of the news clip, photographs of the 3 victims were shown. Alright, so who are they? I had seen those faces before. The 3 thugs, right?
あいつらだ。
知ってるの？
昨日僕に絡んできた。
Well, looks like I was right on the money with this one. And so it continues. Greetings, my name is Neosekken, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Chaos Head Noah. So, Ayase, how are you doing? Better upstairs, I hope. As well as everywhere else, for that matter. Kishimoto Ayase was lying in a hospital bed, idly gazing out the window. No bars lined the outside of it, a fact which set it apart from those at Ark Heart Medical, where Ayase had stayed in the past. All that stood past the window's frame was the landscape of Shinjuku, decorated by skyscrapers and illuminated by the sunset. Flocks of pigeons soared freely through the sky, flapping their wings to their heart's content. Every now and then she would gaze upon this sight with a pained expression. I guess this answers my question how she's doing upstairs somewhat. Her slightly tired eyes were empty and bleak. Her irises reflected nothing. Her lips, which could let flow a voice so beautiful it shook the youth of Shibuya, were now sealed tight. Not even so much as a hum escaped from them. Following her suicide attempt, an event which caused quite the turmoil, she had been admitted to the psychiatric ward of a large hospital in Yoyogi. Her injuries were already very nearly healed. According to the doctors, it had been nothing short of a miracle that she had been able to survive a fall from that height, let alone with barely even a scratch. However, she had indeed hit her head fairly hard, and as such, she'd been rushed to the hospital, primarily so they could see how the situation would develop. It had already been over a week since then. It's already been a week, huh? However, despite her having been admitted for such a reason, all it seemed to entail was a few rudimentary tests, taken every couple of days or so. Beyond that, she had been rather neglected. Her hospital room was private, with no other beds inside it. Ever since her stay had begun, her D-sword had been leaning against the window. It constantly emitted a blue light, yet nobody who visited her ever seemed to notice. Not that there had been many visitors to begin with. Phantasm fans would attempt to force their way into her room daily, but as they always caused a disturbance in the process, the hospital had an excuse to forbid them from visiting her. And since Ayase was somewhat detached from her family, there were almost no others who came to visit her. What's going on with your family, I wonder? Probably nothing great, considering the hospital that you stayed in as a kid. Can't imagine I definitely can imagine you probably don't have the best relationship with your family. Maybe. Her fellow band members had made an appearance once, but Ayase used that opportunity to announce her decision for the band to break up. They had not contacted her again since.
Kishimoto-san, 体温計ピピってなりました?
A nurse wearing white scrubs opened the door to the room, then swiftly entered. And how are you doing this fine day? Not overworked, I hope? Ayase slowly turned to look at the nurse's face, then took out the thermometer that had been resting under her arm. It was as if she had only just remembered its presence. The nurse took a look at the recorded temperature shown on its digital screen, then took note of it on the clipboard she had brought with her.
37度1分と。
I keep forgetting what that equates to in Fahrenheit, but I'm assuming that's high.
ちょっと熱っぽいかしら。
Yeah, I thought as much.
ズキズキするわ。
Slightly high, but high. Ayase grimaced in pain once again.
あら、また頭痛？でもそれは薬の副作用よ。気にしなくてもそのうち良くなりますよ。
I hate that your mouth doesn't move, but your eyes do every time you speak. You freak. Having recorded her temperature, the nurse consoled Ayase with a kind smile. Her expression was so gentle, it was clear to all how she was able to put her patients at ease. And yet, despite the nurse's attempts, Ayase simply pushed her hand against her forehead as she shook it back and forth. Ayase had been plagued by mild headaches ever since she had first been hospitalized. They were not especially painful, but they still left her with an uncomfortable feeling that refused to go away. One that felt as if her brain itself was convulsing. It even reached the point where her ability to think was impaired. As well as this, her body would feel as heavy as lead. Ayase had experienced such symptoms in the past, namely, when she had been institutionalized at Ark Heart Medical. Back then, her head had constantly been split apart by painful headaches, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It deprived her of all sleep and emotional stability. Good Lord. Those who were the memories she did not want to resurface. The past she had sealed away. The events of around 2 years ago. And yet, her headache was causing them to flash back into her mind once more. Jesus. In them, a dark room, its single window locked behind bars. Apart from the wall in which that window stood, the rest of the walls were covered with mirrors. Ayase had been placed in the center of the room, sat in a crude steel chair. She was wearing headgear with countless cables protruding from it. Her hands were tied to the back of the chair. Her head was locked in place with her chin tilted slightly upward. Not another soul was present in the room. Thus, all that could be heard were the sounds of Ayase's labored breathing and the mental groans of the chair she sat upon. Saliva trickled down from the corners of her mouth, accompanied by moans akin to those of a beast's. If anyone were to hear them, they would never have been able to guess that they would be coming from a girl as young as her. She was being tortured. Slow, methodical torture. One that made very, very little sound. The method only involved one single thing. Not even an action. A drop of water falling from above onto her forehead every 5 seconds on the exact same spot. I know this torture method. It's a Chinese water torture method, if I remember correctly. At least I think it was the Chinese that came up with it. Could be wrong. That was all it took. And it would continue unrelentingly for 2 full days. Jesus Christ. The result. Ayase could think only of the drop that would fall next. Her senses were sharpened to their limits. And each time a drop fell onto her forehead, another hallucination would be born. One in which each and every nerve across her body was plucked out one by one. One in which the bones of her entire skeleton crumbled to dust. One in which her head was pierced by a long, sharp awl. one in which all liquids within her body, including her blood, froze to ice. One in which the skin lining her entire body slowly rotted away, before eventually peeling off. Assailed without end by these sensations, Ayase could no longer maintain her sanity. Well, I think we know for certain now that Ark Heart Medical is not good for one's heart, among other things, as it turns out. You were just used in human experiments. But here's my question. Why did they let you go? Returning to her senses, she breathed erratically as she tightly gripped the sheets lining the bed. Her body trembled as those dark memories of hers resurfaced in her mind. The nurse that had been in her room just a moment ago was already gone. Dinner time had just arrived at the hospital, and the clamorous sounds that came from it resounded from down the hall. Ayase tried to recall the words the nurse had spoken to her right before leaving. Was her headache really just a side effect of the drugs she was on? Or had it been caused by her hitting her head, perhaps? Perhaps it was just a hallucination brought forth by her past memories. She was unable to come to a decisive conclusion. Wiping away the sweat that ran down her forehead, Ayase called forth a smile laced with self-loathing.
構わないわ。今さら何をされたって。あれはあの神罰を耐え抜いたんだから。
Is that how you see it? Divine punishment?
Oh, 迷わない。私は。
Thinking about it now, I guess there is plenty of cases where a child undergoing severe cases of abuse may potentially come to the conclusion that they must have done something wrong in order to be on the receiving end of such abuse. I don't know. I don't remember how common that is, but I do know it happens. Sounds to me like you're a case of that. Okay, Takumi, you got a new task that I'm gonna hoist upon your shoulders. You need to break into this hospital room and tell Ayase it was not her fault. Murmuring in perhaps delirium, Ayase soon became aware of a sound reverberating throughout the hall. The comforting sound of shoes stepping on the linoleum floor. It was certainly not being made by a nurse, and the sound of footsteps was heading right for the room she was in. Someone knocked on her door, and she sealed her lips tight. Wait a minute, is that Suwa? Well, what are you doing here? That someone was but a single man. He had come bringing gifts, namely a large basket filled with all manner of fruits. She could recognize the man, which was far from a good sign. Thus she stared at him with a dubious glare.
どうも。あ、別に怪しいもんじゃないっすよ。自分は。
知ってるわ。
The man was a detective at the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. He had once shadowed Ayase, as she was originally a suspect for the New Gen case. The detective, relieved by her response, scratched his head. His demeanor was unendingly casual.
いやー、嬉しいっす。君みたいな美人に覚えててもらえて。 記憶力いいんすね。
The detective moved closer to her bed. Ayase briefly glanced at her D-sword leaning against a window. It lay just outside her reach. What's wrong with Suwa? He's pretty harmless, as far as I can tell.
今日はお見舞いに来たんすよ。
そうは思えないわ。目的は？
鋭いっすね。
The detective flinched very overtly, his reaction perhaps bordering on theatrical.
まあちょっと綾瀬ちゃんに聞きたいことがあって。あ、これよかったら食べてほしいっす。
The detective smiled instantly, presented the basket he had brought with him, then placed it at Ayase's feet without waiting for approval.
うまいっすよ。あと高かった。
いらない。
まあそう言わずせっかく買ってきたんで、後でお母さんが来た時にでも切ってもらって。あ、しまった。綾瀬ちゃんはもう何年も両親に会ってないんだったっすね。
Despite the detective's insensitive remark, Ayase felt nothing in response to it. Her ties to her parents had been cut from a very young age. Her parents had a reputation to uphold, so a child that often caused problems like Ayase had been inconvenient to them, to say the least. And what reputation is that? Are they business leaders or something? Her only remaining contact with them was the wire transfer she received for her living expenses each month, though it could hardly be called that.
申し訳ないっす。
The detective apologized, bowing down hastily. Ayase had only just gotten over the shock caused by her flashback, so she was in no mood to speak with him. Nonetheless, she urged herself to talk all the same.
聞きたいことって何？アリバイ？
Huh? An alibi?
違うっすよ。それは前に散々聞いたし。
Oh, you mean for you.
もう綾瀬ちゃんの容疑は晴れたっす。
Thought you was talking about him for a second.
真っ白。
目星はついたの？犯人の。
それは教えられないんすよ。捜査上の秘密っす。
匠。
秘密っす。
The detective smirked. He was attempting to laugh the question away. And yet, something unrefined could be seen through the cracks of that smile.
しかし西条くんは不思議な少年っすね。彼を見ていると殺人の容疑者にはとても見えない。もしあれで本当に犯人だったとしたら、まさに人の皮をかぶった悪魔っす。
まだ容疑者なの？彼。
いや、そういうわけじゃないっすよ。
Still? Even after everything that's happened so far? I don't know if that's just lucky on my part or something else. The detective casually denied it with a smile, putting Yase's persistent questions to rest.
ああ、今の話、誰にも言っちゃダメっすからね。
Okay, I heard from a squirrel. Got it.
情報漏洩すると上司に怒られるんすよ。まあ当然なんすけど。この前も先輩のとばっちりで怒られたばっかで。綾瀬ちゃんも一度会ってると思うんすけど、覚えてるかな。バンさんっていう髪がボサボサで武将髭生やしたおっさんでか。
Ayase did remember him. When she had been questioned, that older detective had been even more talkative than the younger one she was conversing with now. His way of speaking had been a lot more assertive as well.
あの人がすぐこのバカって怒鳴るんすよ。
Then stop being a schmuck. Problem solved.
そのくせ自分は本来の操作をせずに、なんだかわけのわからないことばっか調べてて。
Because you're a schmuck. A schmuck is what a schmuck is, schmuck. So stop schmucking around and get back to work.
挙句の果てに自分まで無理やり付き合わされて。
As is a schmuck's duty to tag along with his superiors.
最近胃が痛いんすよね。
A schmuck possessing a mind? Now that's news to me.
いやまあ根はいい人っすし、勘が異常に鋭い人で、過去にも難事件をいくつか解決に導いたらしいんすけどね。
その話をするためここに来たの。
Ayase interrupted the man, and his smile quickly soured.
ああ、いや申し訳ないっす。つい愚痴入っちゃったっすね。今の話は全面的に内緒にしてほしいっす。諏訪守、一生のお願いっすよ。
それで
一つ目はなんであんなことを？
Despite his ambiguous phrasing, Ayase could tell he was referring to her diving off the school rooftop.
もう何度も話したわ。他の刑事さんに。
邪神王グラジオールの復活を阻止するためですか？
死ぬつもりなんてなかった。魂を一つ上のステージに持っていこうとしただけよ。
例の若者の間で話題になった君の歌についても似たようなことを言ってたっすよね。
And with that, and that was the second question he had for her, Ayase let out a faint sigh.
ニュージェネのことを歌ったものなんかじゃないわ、あの詩は。グラジオール記黙示録詩編のインスピレーションを受けて作った第3章102節よ。世界に邪神王グラジオールが現れようとしている。復活を阻止するにはグラジオールが流した黒い血によって作られた7つの杭が必要。杭は剣へと形を変え、神罰を乗り越えた7人の黒騎士の手に渡る。目には目を、歯には歯を。邪神を背負いし人間だけが邪神王を滅ぼせるの。
なんか映画みたいっすね。
Very interesting verse, not gonna lie. The Gladioul Book of Psalms and Revelation. Fictional. A high fantasy novel based on the Eastern European myth of Gladioul, the Wicked Hearted King. With the saga in its entirety being told over the course of 23 volumes, it depicts the battle between the 7 Black Knights and Gladioul. It was written by R.C.O. Ziegler from 1929 to 1951. The series has been translated into several languages, but it never gained widespread appeal due to its rather esoteric writing style. Ziegler's other works related to Gladioul mythos include The Gladioul Book of Kings and Wicked Hearts, Apostolic Letter, and more. All these works are collectively referred to as the Gladioul Saga. But I've already learned all this information back when Takumi first looked it up, when he was researching D-swords. None of this is new.
そういう壮大な設定は好きっす。
Although considering that they're referencing it all again here as a tip, maybe that's supposed to be a clue to me, the player, that this information actually is pretty damn crucial to whatever's going on here. In Shibuya, I mean. And well, I've kind of already suspected that for a while too. So I guess my point still stands. Somewhat. Ayase glared at the detective in response to his comment.
設定じゃないわ。現実よ。
じゃあ最後の質問っす。
The detective casually brushed away Ayase's objection, though she was all too used to this form of dismissal by now. Not a single person she had told this story to thus far had believed it.
君や西条くんの他にも水明の生徒について何人か洗ったんすけどね。
The detective mumbled to himself as he folded his arms. This was very obviously another act of theatrics, and Ayase had no intention of commenting on it.
何？
すごくバカバカしい質問なんすけど。
Oh, go ahead and tell me. I'm used to crazy by this point.
刑事が質問するようなことじゃないんすよね、本当は。子供じみてるっていうか。
そう。
Well, at least you admit you're childish, you schmuck.
質問する気がないなら出て行って。頭が痛いの。
ああ、いや、実はね、バンさんが妙なことを言い出してるんすよ。君たちは魔法使いなんじゃないかって。
Upon hearing the subject of that remark was plural, Ayase raised her eyebrows in suspicion.
違いますよね。
I don't remember him saying that at any point, unless it's happened off screen.
使えるわ。
As she replied, Ayase's line of sight was directed not toward the man, but toward her hand that lay atop her bed sheets.
綾瀬ちゃんって面白い子っすね。
でも、ニュージェネはグラジオールの騎士とは無関係。
It's unrelated?
はあ、そうっすか。
Is it really unrelated?
まあどうでもいいんすけどね。
The detective, completely disinterested in what Ayase had just said, brushed off her words once again, then began to stretch. Well, that was some serious mood whiplash that I wasn't expecting to get. The moment she did so, a digital sound suddenly cut through the silence of the room. The detective, surprised by this interruption, reached into the pocket of his suit and took out his cell phone. What tune is this, I wonder? Sounds like a marching tune.
まずった。病院で携帯禁止なんですよね。電源オフにしておくの忘れてた。うわ、しかも女からだし。付き合って4年になるラブラブの彼女がいるんですよ。
Well, I didn't know you had a girlfriend. She must have poor taste, dating a schmuck like you. Okay, I'll stop now. He turned his phone off with a grin, forcing the caller to hang up. He then turned to Ayase once more.
綾瀬ちゃんは映画見るっすか？スパークウォーズって知らない？それに出てくるダース・スパイダー伯爵のテーマなんす。今のメロディ。
Spark Wars? Count Darth Spider? No way. They're not hinting that you are Darth Spider, are they? Our writers, I mean. No way. If I'm not reading too deeply into this, then that would mean that you're the new gen culprit, aren't you? Because it was Darth Spider, a guy that had a Darth Spider costume that forced Takumi to try to grab that D-sword over at the 107. And then it was the Darth Spider figure that hired those goons to try to rough me up followed by said goons being murdered as part of the New Gen murders, in the fashion they are, with Dokyun being put on their foreheads and everything. That would then explain the inconsistencies in the Crew Fiction police report. The new gen killer, if he was part of the investigation team, would be in the perfect spot to alter the reports, alter evidence, in order to lead the police astray. And when Bon was trying to bring attention to that building that was not present in the group dive video, you interrupted the way you did. That was you trying to draw attention away from that, wasn't it? Well, holy shit. I know a ringtone by itself is... And using a ringtone in of itself here in order to implicate you as the new gen culprit requires one hell of a leap of logic. I can definitely admit that. So I definitely should keep my eyes open for any more evidence. But now I'm starting to be a little bit suspicious of you, Suwa. Ayase had no interest in movies, nor anything of the sort. Having long since decided that she had no obligation to further entertain the detective's questioning, she returned to gazing silently outside the window.
実は自分スパークウォーズオタクなんすよ。あ、興味ないっすか。そりゃ失礼したっす。じゃ、自分はこれで。
With that, the detective concluded the conversation with which he had no partner, then left the hospital room. Ayase did not even turn around to watch him go. With the man gone, all that reflected in her eyes was the twilight sky slowly turning indigo. Oh, shut up, you bitch. I'm busy pondering over a possible big revelation I just had here. Feelings mutual. The latter feeling definitely isn't mutual, however. There is only hate in my heart for you, Saratan. Pure, unadulterated hate. I stared in a daze at Saratan as she moved around the monitor. The final episode of Bloodtoon had aired deep into last night. The story was gradually getting more and more intense, and the episode had received particularly high praise on @channel. This was the third time I'd seen it, but none of it was really sticking with me. I checked the time and saw that it was past 10 p.m. Rimi had left around 8. While she'd been here, she encouraged my depressed self in many ways, and she said so many nice things to me. Thanks to her being by my side, I felt less lonely today than the entire week prior. That being said, Rimi still wasn't taking the situation all that seriously. It felt almost like she was avoiding talking about New Gen entirely. Maybe she was just done with it. With me. I think she's just trying to keep us from getting in too deep, because us getting in too deep would probably have to force her hand against us. Which is likely what we see the end result of in the beginning opening cinematic when she kills us. Her friend had been hurt in the earthquake, and it sounded like she already had a lot on her plate with just that. She probably just didn't have any room left to bother with me and my problems. But the issue with that was, while yes, I was probably way too paranoid, there was no doubt that this was a genuinely dangerous situation. I could be killed today, even. Shogun had been coming after me all this time. Persistent didn't even begin to cover it. If I could just understand what he was doing, or why he was doing it, then I could work out some countermeasures. Well, if I'm right about Suwa being the new-gen culprit here, or at least and the Shogun that's been bothering you since that whole fiasco over at 107, well, we're gonna have a damn rough time of evading a freaking detective.
So あのおじさん、別れ際にこんなこと言ってたのら。中でも一番特別なのは、その目、誰の目を産み落とした少年。
Whose eyes are those eyes? You could hear those words all over Shibuya by now. On the net, it becomes synonymous with the culprit. It was a phrase I'd used pretty often for a really long time. It was without a doubt a message from Shogun, who knew that. Either that, or an intentional way of provoking me. When had I first started using that phrase? It felt like someone had taught it to me. I vaguely remembered the first time I used it. It was an essay I'd written back in elementary school. The title was that very same phrase. Whose eyes are those eyes? I'd almost completely forgotten what I'd actually written in it. I wanted to check now. What had I written in that essay? It was probably stored in my parents' place. Though I had a feeling they might have thrown the old thing away by now. Well, it doesn't hurt to check. Could use any lead at this point. Then again, when it came to things that were pretty important to me as a kid, I did have a habit of storing them in a big empty candy tin I'd used to call my treasure box. The essay could have potentially been in there. Well, go find the box. What to do? Should I go to my parents'? But I didn't want to show my face to Nanami. I wouldn't know what to say. Well, considering the situation we're in right now, I think it's definitely of the utmost importance that we follow this lead that you've came up with. You said it yourself. You said it yourself. We need to develop some countermeasures here, of some kind. I sluggishly rose from my seat, then collapsed onto the sofa.
これは違うんだからね。私は別にさ、立ち食いそばが好物なわけじゃないさ。何ニヤニヤしてんの？このボケナス。もう怒った。
You know, I just remembered I never had soba noodles in my life. Are they even any good?
うなれ！侍コンデンサー！
Lying face up, I gazed at the ceiling while ignoring Sarah's protesting. That dreary, bare steel ceiling. Unlike my room at my parents' house, there wasn't a single groove in the ceiling that looked like a person's face. Suddenly, in the corner of my vision, I noticed a familiar tin sitting by the eroge packages piled up on my loft bed. It's here?
あれって。
I hurriedly stood up and climbed the ladder to get a closer look. It was a reddish-brown rectangular tin, about the size of a B5 piece of paper. The word shortbread was written on the lid in white letters. There was no mistaking it. It was my treasure box. Well, isn't that convenient? Now we don't have to go to your parents' house. I must have brought it from my parents' place. Though I definitely didn't remember doing so. Wait a minute. You sure you didn't manage to make this thing manifest out of the ether? Because if this thing isn't actually real, then how can we actually rely on whatever's in there? GJ me. Always thinking ahead. I quickly grabbed the tin and opened the lid. Inside were a few test answer sheets, essays, scraps of paper torn out from sketchbooks, and so on. It was mostly all paper, but there were still a couple small objects in there. I took all the pages from the tin at once, then began flipping through them for my target. It didn't take long to find. After all, it was at the very top. The essay paper had faded in color. The handwriting, not even a mother could call it good. Looks good to me. Could this essay be hiding some kind of important secret? Something Shogun was particularly exploiting? Well, somebody's certainly exploiting it. Something that had to do with why the homeless man had referred to me as the most special. With a gulp, I began to read it one word at a time, being careful not to overlook anything. Whose eyes are those eyes? Nishijo Takumi, Class 4-3. I dream a lot. In my dreams, older me visits me in a time machine. He doesn't look like me at all. His time machine has a lot of buttons. I think if you push a shower, or some shampoo or something comes out. Push one. I asked older me how it works, and he said you could go see dinosaurs, or even go back to when cavemen were around. He asked me what I'm bad at in school, and I said I'm bad at math. He told me there was a switch that would make me really good at math. I tried to push it once, but he got mad. He said I had to work hard and get better by myself. That was the only time he got mad at me. After he stopped being mad, he was super nice, so I was happy. He told me about the girl I was going to marry. That's a secret. I asked him about God. He told me God is real. I think he's real too. My mom said God is always watching, and he'll make you go to hell if you do bad things. So I can absolutely never do bad things. I have to be nice to my little sister too. Mom told me God doesn't watch you do bad things, but that's a scary man. But it's a scary man instead. The scary man is the whose eyes are those eyes monster. He makes you go to hell if he sees you. God's eyes, and whose eyes are those eyes, are in the sky, the ceiling, the walls, and there's a ton of them in my school, and they're watching me no matter what. So I think I have to do a lot of good things, like studying and other stuff because of that. It's embarrassing though, because they watch me even when I do things like go to the toilet or take a bath. Also, ever since I was little, I could close my eyes in dreams sometimes, even though I wasn't sleeping. It was like the inside of my head was like a video game or a manga. But when I do that, the whose eyes are those eyes monster comes out, so I don't want to do that. I asked my mom, and she told me not to do it. But while I'm writing this essay, I asked older me in my dreams to tell me more about the time machine, But he said I knew everything. He wouldn't tell me more stuff because I'm just a kid. So from now on, I want to do lots of good things so I can beat Whose Eyes Are Those Eyes. The end. An older you with a time machine? One who you don't recognize. And this Whose Eyes Are Those Eyes is the name of a monster? Yeah, I agree. This would have been around the time when I first started feeling God's gaze. Maybe I was going through some sort of phase back then. Either way, trying to understand anything from this extremely cryptic essay was beyond impossible. It felt like it'd be easier to decipher a bunch of hieroglyphs than it would be trying to figure out what the hell I've been talking about. As I thought that, I noticed that something was scribbled on the back of the page. Come to think of it, hadn't I loved dueling back then? Yeah. Like in my social studies textbooks, the pictures of historic figures would always have mustaches or sunglasses drawn on them, and my notebooks would always have flip-book-esque animations drawn in the corners. Back then, I started enjoying drawing more and more, to the point where I'd even gotten my parents to buy me a sketchbook. Although to clarify, it wasn't like my drawings were anything to write home about. Immersing myself in nostalgia, I turned the essay over to check out what I'd scribbled on it. Wait a minute. I've seen this image before. I think. Equals IR2. Wait a minute, that's a mathematical formula above this thing, isn't it? Or a scientific formula? Its hands have different hand gestures. It was an incomprehensible drawing. But while it was definitely incomprehensible, there was still something familiar about it. Something I'd seen recently.
IR2.
Whether it was a mathematical formula, or had some other kind of meaning, or was just a meaningless string of numbers and letters, I had no idea. But... wait! That's the same formula. This formula. It was the exact same one Shogun had posted out of nowhere, back when he'd first come and contacted me in the chat room. Whose eyes are those eyes, and IR2. LR2, excuse me. No, IR2. Two key things that come from this essay I'd written many years ago. Things that even I myself had forgotten. And if Shogun knew them, that would mean he'd been reading my mind after all. Either that, or they just simply found this drawing. Which would mean that somebody's been stalking you even before someone's been stalking you and going through your shit even well before they contact you in the chat room. Assuming that, again, this is all the work of the same person, which I don't think it is. Within the Frisia reception room, or rather, the narrow space partitioned off by a few shelves being used as one, Bond sat deep in concentration, scanning through a number of files. And I didn't silence my phone, it turns out. That's annoying. Anyway, Bond, that little junior detective that you got following you around, I suggest that you have someone tail him for a while. 24/7. Follow him everywhere he goes. Because I have a sneaking suspicion that if you do, you guys might find something very interesting. Maybe. Opposite to him sat Yua, huddled up and making herself small. She'd been taking frequent glances at Bond in an attempt to read his expression. From an outsider's perspective, it appeared almost like a child showing their parents their report card. Bond was currently reading the report of everything Yua had investigated concerning the New-Gen cases and Nishijo Takumi. It also included the chat log between Takumi and Shogun from the day prior to the crew fiction case. As a result of her findings, Yua had concluded that Takumi was undoubtedly the true culprit behind the New-Gen cases.
すごいわね。これ全部一人で調べたの？
はい、一応。
Yua hung her head apologetically in response to Momose's praise. She stared at the Jirofroggy straps hanging from the bag below her feet. She was speaking with a detective and the boss of an investigation firm. In terms of investigating, they were as professional as one could get. Compared to their prowess, information gathered by the investigation of an ordinary high school girl would be akin to childish scribblings. And yet, despite the supposed gap, Bond and Momose found themselves both impressed by the quality of the report.
なかなかいい着眼点だ。よく調べたな。とりわけこの西条匠の多重性ってのが興味深い。西条匠は多重人格であり、オリジナルとなった西条匠の人格が眠っている時、つまり他の人格が活動中に事件を起こしている。本当に面白いわ。
An interesting idea, but I don't think it's the correct one by a long shot.
まあでも、ちょっとばかり現実離れしすぎてるかな。
刑事さんは、西条くんのこと犯人だって考えてないんですか？
はっきり言っていいかい？
Might as well. Her face stiffened, but after a moment, Yua nodded.
警察じゃ西条匠は容疑者として見ていない。
へえ、そうなの。
Not just Yua, but Momose gaped in amazement as well. A wry smile formed on Bond's lips. He leaned back in his seat and rested the back of his head in his hands.
少なくとも貼り付け事件じゃ西条は白だ。遺体を貼り付けていた杭には指紋がべったり付着しててな。
Oh, really now?
西条の指紋を手に入れて照合してみたんだが、全く合致しなかった。
Yua was turning paler by the second. Her lips trembled. Now that everything she had believed in had collapsed beneath her feet, feelings of guilt at the awful things she said to Takumi encroached upon her heart.
杭にあった指紋から容疑者についてはほぼ固まってんだ。まだマスコミにも公表してないけどな。ちなみにそれ、諏訪のお手柄だったりする。
Yeah, that's the problem. Suwa is the one handling the evidence.
諏訪ちゃんは頑張ってるっていうのに、バンちゃんはよくここでのんびりしていられるわね。
実は俺、捜査本部から外されたんだわ。
はあ？
本来の捜査サボって G レートのこととか調べてんの 上司にバレちゃってな。
This was the reason why his subordinate, Suwa, had been the one to inform him of the 7th incident. There had been no reason for anyone else to call an investigator that was no longer working the case.
あんたね、もっとうまく立ち回りなさいよ。まあバンちゃんに G レートのことを教えた私にも責任はあるけど。
気にすんなって。それに G レートの件は個人的にも気になってたんだ。まあ西条にしても貼り付け以外の事件じゃまだ捜査線上にいる。もしかするとユアちゃんの推理が正しいかもしれん。
ニュージェネは同一犯による連続殺人事件じゃないって警察は考えてるの？
まだなんとも。ただついさっき第7の事件が起きたようだしな。個人的には犯人は複数いると思ってる。
Why do you think that?
いろいろ喋っちまった。口外したって知られたらクビになっちまう。今のはオフレコな。
Bond playfully placed his forefinger on his lip.
で、本題なんだが。
Excuse me. Having thought that her report had been the reason she'd been summoned, Yua tilted her head in puzzlement.
聞きたいことってのは学校のことなんだよ。ユアちゃんは青井瀬名って子知ってるかい？君の同級生のはずなんだが。
After pondering for a moment, Yua shook her head apologetically.
名前は聞いたことがあるような気がしますけど、話したことはありません。
ああ、そうか。
その人が犯人なんですか？
ああ、全くの別件だ。昨日徹夜したのもその子のこと調べてたからでな。
あんたさっき女子高生の生態がどうとかって。
Mimose, ever perplexed, received a wink and a grin from Bon, before he turned back toward Yua.
例えば学校でものすごい手品を使う女生徒がいるって噂を聞いたことは？
いえ、ありませんけど。
さっぱり話が見えないわね。何のこと？
例えば何もない空間から剣を取り出すような手品とか。
Yua's head snapped upward. Her expression was one of blatant astonishment.
どうしてそれ？
You know about the D swords too? Despite being the one to ask the question, Bon also had a look of surprise on his face.
心当たりがあるのかい？
Yua hesitated. Then, after a moment, nodded resolutely.
どこで見た？
駅の近くの地下道です。西条くんと岸本さんが。
フェスだな。それで
Yua briefly recounted her dramatic pursuit from around 2 weeks prior. How she had gone to a manga cafe to meet Nishijo Takumi. How she had been a little forceful when talking to him, causing him to flee. How she had frantically chased him around Shibuya. How he had then managed to evade her, and how right when she was about to give up, she had stumbled upon Takumi and Ayase entering the underpass.
だから私、その階段の上から2人の様子をこっそり伺っていたんです。2人は階段の一番下で何か話していて、どんなことを話していたかは聞き取れなかったんですけど、そしたら突然岸本さんが剣を何もないところから取り出したんです。
The fact that you could see them, that you could see her pull the sword out, means you have the same powers as they do. So you probably got a D sword of your own hanging around somewhere, huh?
すごく大きな剣で
You're also a
バッグにも入らないよう
gigalomaniac.
な。
まさか。
俺が見たものと同じだな。
え
Because if I remember right, when Fess pulled out her sword, I didn't see it change into any different colors or anything that could indicate that she was altering its composition in any way. As far as I'm aware, it had that light blue coloring to it, so if it worked the same as Seina's sword in that respect, that would mean that it would basically just be an antimatter sword that shouldn't be visible to any normal human. And if that's the case, and you were still able to see it regardless, then that would mean you also have gigalomaniac powers.
俺が見たのは岸本じゃなかったかな。さっき名前を出した青井瀬名っていう少女だ。実は葵が剣を振り回してたっていう目撃証言が渋谷のあちこちから出てる。
その手品、渋谷の若い子たちの間で流行ってるのかしら。
でも私が見たあれは手品にはとても見えませんでした。それに
他にも何か見たの？
信じてもらえるかどうかわからなくて、誰にも話したことはないんですけど。
There were two Fesses!
あの時岸本さんは剣を出しただけじゃなくて。
Yua's words faltered, and she slowly licked her lips. She looked lost on whether or not she should continue. Her eyes darted around the room. But eventually, she steeled her resolve and fixed her gaze upon Bon.
二人に分身したんです。まるで本当にその場に二人いるみたいでした。私、わけがわからなくて。
You could see that too. You saw it happen. Your mind didn't process it as just something that was always there. You saw that there was only one Ayase, and then suddenly there was two. Again, like someone who was a gigalomaniac would be able to perceive it. A heavy silence covered the reception room. All three within it were at a complete loss for words.
とにかく一体どんな種があるのかわかんねえが、そんな手品みてえな真似ができる連中がこの渋谷には何人かいるらしい。まあそれと岸本綾瀬も青井瀬名も西条匠と接触したことは確認済みだ。これが偶然とは思えねえわけよ。
西条君、
あの少年の周囲ではどうも現実離れしたことばかりが起きてるような気がする。
Understatement. As Bon said that, his words from the call before reappeared in his mind.
怪獣か魔法使いで済ませられるならよっぽどいいけどな。
Bon's murmur did not reach the other two. Averse to the gloomy atmosphere, Momose took a breath and sipped on the tea her subordinate had brought over to her. Then, as she brought the cup back down, she put on a smile and unceremoniously made it to change the topic.
ところで岩ちゃん、そのカバンにぶら下がってるカエル、最近流行ってるんでしょ？
あ、はい。
Yua gave a sigh of relief, having been saved by the kind company president.
なんて言うんだっけ？
ゲロカエルです。
Garo, Froggy. I've been saying it wrong this whole entire time.
いろいろ種類が出てるんじゃなかった？ 10 種類ぐらい。
はい。私は友達からもらっただけなので詳しくは知らないんですけど。
なんだってこんな手抜き商品が流行るんだろうな。見た目だって俺の方がずっと可愛いぞ。
No comment.
バンちゃん、寝言は寝てから言いなさい。
冗談だって。
私も実はどうして流行っているのかよくわからないんです。
あら、結構可愛いと思うけどね。
ももちゃんの見る目も衰えたな。
世論は私の方が正しいって証明してるじゃない。バンちゃんも買いに行った方がいいわよ。
I agree. You should buy one. Join the Froggy cult.
一体どこへ行けば買えるものなんだ？
ゲロカエルの専門ショップがあちこちにあって。
専門ショップだ？
そこで金曜日に行列に並べば買えると思います。
金曜日？
毎週金曜日に新しいデザインのものが発売になるんです。好きな子はコンプリートとか言って全部集めてるみたいで。
While Yu was in the midst of speaking, Bon had turned to Momose while scratching the stubble on his chin.
金曜か。
Friday. I forget. Isn't Friday also the same day where those irregularities in the GE rates also tend to happen? The ones that you two have noticed?
流行るとは思えないものが流行ってて、 GE レートは毎週末に上昇する。
Yeah, I was right.
まさかバンちゃん。
当たってみる価値はあるかもな。
Are you seriously suggesting that those frogs also are tied into everything that's going on in Shibuya? Wait. What if those things act as kind of like receptors for those pod people to transmit those signals? Anyone who has a Gero Froggy basically turns into a antenna that can receive an amplified signal from the pod from those pod people, and thus come under their control. If that's the case, then that would definitely explain why those signals don't affect every single person that comes within a certain range of them. Probably because they don't have the thing that would make them susceptible to brainwashing. Like maybe a receptor of some kind. But they're just little pieces of cloth and stuffing, aren't they? And maybe someone should grab one of those frogs and dissect them, see what's inside. The second I'd poked my head into school on Tuesday, Misumi-kun immediately invited me to go see Ayase in the hospital with him. Given that the idea hadn't even crossed my mind, it caught me off guard. But before I'd been able to respond, Rimi said she wanted to come too, for whatever reason, and I ended up being swept along with her as a result. Now let me be clear. I had a heart and all. Do you? But considering the menace known as Shogun was drawing closer and closer to me, I didn't think this was exactly the time to show it. I didn't want to die. Coming in through the front entrance, Misumi-kun looked around the lobby in confusion.
どうしたの？
いや、岸本の病室ってどこなんだろうなって思ってよ。
Had he seriously come this far without knowing that? This guy was beyond belief sometimes.
ここは外来棟だよ。病棟は隣。そうなのか。
大臣、しっかりしてよ。
AH Tokyo General Hospital. It was a hospital I'd gone to ever since I was a kid. I'd even come here just the other day, so I was pretty knowledgeable on where everything was. Dr. Takashina's face flashed across my mind, and I involuntarily groaned to myself. As we walked to the hospital ward, Misumi-kun turned to me.
で、病棟の何号室だと思う？そんなのわかんないよ。
This was a general hospital, so there were obviously a ton of different wards and departments. If I had to guess...
多分外科じゃないかな。でももしかすると精神科かも。
There hadn't been any visible injuries on Ayase after she'd fallen, and considering she'd attempted suicide, her mind had likely been brought to the brink, so her being in the psychiatric ward seemed very possible. Even I'd been taken to the psych ward after the uproar at O-Front. O-Front. I'm not the 107 O-Front, that's what I meant to say earlier. Huh.
常識でしょ、常識。ね、タク。
I don't think it's necessarily common sense. I might have not known if I hadn't come here so many times in the past. Right as we were entering the hospital ward, Rimi ground to a halt.
私、お手洗い行ってくる。先に行ってて。
You sure you're not running off to go talk to somebody? Like your boss? With a wave of her hand, Rimi quickly headed back toward the outpatient ward. Thinking that wandering around the ward would cause problems for the patients, we decided to ask for help at the nurse's station. And just like I'd predicted, they told us that she was on the floor for psychiatric patients. Oh boy, DT time. The hospital room had an area of around 10 square meters. I'm gonna go with green. There was a toilet to the right of the entrance, and there was a bed near the back. The setting sun shone through the window on the other side of the room. Ayase wasn't in the bed. Based on how the sheets were a little messed up, it looked like she had been there until very recently. Why are you in my delusion, Misumi? Should I be worried?
戻ってくるまで待つか。
The moment he said that, Misumi-kun started rummaging around the room for some reason. He didn't even have a shred of decency. Right now, it wouldn't be wrong to refer to this as Ayase's room. A number of her things were lying around, mixed with the smell of antiseptic that was nice scent you could only find in a girl's room. That was a nice scent, you mean? Just kind of bursting into it while she wasn't there felt like we were peeping right into her private life, and I didn't feel very comfortable with that.
そういうの良くないよ。外で、待ってた方が。ちょっと見るだけだって。お前も知りたいと思わねえのか？ S の私生活ってやつをよ。興味あるだろ？
Okay, sure. Ayase's personal life was a total mystery. Surely a quick glance wouldn't be so bad. Misumi-kun wasn't even showing even an ounce of hesitation. Urged on by his bold attitude, my mind swiftly changed. I turned to look at the door to make sure no one was coming. Then I turned back toward the room. Feeling my heart thump hard in my chest, I started with the bed. I took hold of the slightly ruffled sheets. And then, having no idea what to expect, I gently turned them over. And what I saw was something beyond my imagination. Scandalous. Hidden beneath the sheets was lingerie. A full set of lingerie. A pair of purple panties were scrunched up haphazardly. They had very clearly been taken off recently. This wasn't brand new condition. This was wholly and entirely used. And this was a private room. From that, one could only glean that Ayase was the only one who could have worn these. So smexy. But Takumi, she isn't 2D. I hurriedly turned to check on Misumi-kun. Fortunately, he was too busy flipping through a magazine to have noticed my shocking discovery. I returned my glance to the underwear. I gulped. My throat was dry as a desert. My trembling fingers, almost entirely on their own, reached toward the underwear. Feeling my pulse getting quicker and quicker, I, ever so softly, touched them. For some reason, they felt squishy. Physical. What, were you expecting your fingers to pass through like they're clouds or something? Something wasn't quite right about this.
それは私のお稲荷さんだ。
Fuck. I knew it was a bad sign that you were in this delusion.
Miro yo, Taku. 変な本があるぞ。
I suddenly realized Misumi-kun was calling me. I was standing in the corner of the hospital room. I'm sorry. That's gonna be making me grin like an idiot for a while. I'm not gonna lie. The bed sheets weren't turned over, and there was obviously no sexy lingerie in sight. Phew. It'd been just a delusion, huh? But you might want to be careful with some of these delusions, Takumi. After all, we're in Shibuya, and very weird things are happening that are causing the delusions to be made manifest. If you're not careful, you might one day be actually touching his family jewels. It ended with an extremely horrifying twist, so I'd make sure that memory remained forever sealed. I won't let you live it down. I'll bring it up whenever appropriate. He had taken a magazine from high up on the shelf and was staring at it fixedly.
New だぜ、New。この雑誌、まだ続いてたんだな。
New was a magazine that focused on all facets of the occult. UFOs, aliens, ESP, religion, urban legends, mysterious phenomena, super ancient civilization, parts, etc. It wasn't difficult at all to believe that our very own schizo shit-loving Ayase would be reading it.
こっちの文庫本は、何々？グラジオール記黙示録詩編？ファンタジー小説っぽいな。
I wasn't familiar with that specific book, but the term Gladioul did ring a bell. Where had I heard it again? I was pretty sure it had been pretty recent. Come on, man, think.
岸本と付き合うとなると、この趣味に合わせないといけねえのか。大変そうだぜ、これは。
If this is all you would have, if this is all you would have to deal with, I think she's definitely higher up. She's definitely higher up on the list of good personalities to be with than, well, a lot of other people would be, to be frank. Had he still not given up on dating Ayase, even after being turned down in an instant last time?
Huh?
Just now noticing that, huh, Takumi? Suddenly, Ayase's D-sword came to view in the corner of my eye. He was leaning against the window. It looked like a space battleship ripped right out of a sci-fi movie. I guess I can kinda see it. Kinda. My opinion on it hadn't really changed either. It was an awesome-looking sword, possessing equal parts beauty and cruelty. Even though it wasn't glowing, and even though it was just leaning against a window, it still had the typical impressive feeling of presence to it. Misumi-kun showed no signs of noticing the sword. Huh. So the eyes of normal people couldn't see them after all. Why are you surprised by this? You already had examples of two different people showing off their D swords in crowds, and none of them nobody noticed a thing. I wonder, if I were to take it without Ayase knowing, would the sword become mine? I don't think that's how it works. If I could really obtain a D sword with zero effort, then there was no time to waste here. The desire to do so bubbled up within me. You know, now that I think about it, I'm kind of curious to see what would happen if a D sword wielder tried to handle another person's D sword. Would you spontaneously combust or something? With a gulp, I timidly, ever so timidly, reached out for the sword. I grasped the hilt. Or, well, I tried to grasp it. But my hand had gone right through it, leaving me grasping only thin air. I tried once more, but the result was no different. Probably because it's still antimatter. Well, but then no, that wouldn't really be it, because then Ayase would still be able to handle it even if it was. I couldn't grab it. I couldn't even touch it. Did that mean that the sword wasn't real booted? As mutual recognition hadn't been achieved, it was no more than Ayase's delusion. Okay, yeah, that's right. Mutual recognition needs to be in play. Forgot about that little detail. An illusion. A dream. An afterimage.
何やってんだお前
Trying to firmly grasp Ayase's delusion. Misumi-kun looked at me in confusion. We then waited for around 10 minutes, but Ayase still showed no signs of coming back. Same thing with Rimi. Well, she was still in the bathroom, apparently. Where could she have actually gone? Maybe she went to head us off and go talk to Ayase herself?
リミってこの病室の場所知ってたか
I believe she did. We'd asked for the location of the nurse's station after Rimi had left. She could very well be wandering all throughout the hospital as we spoke, not having any idea where we were or where this place was.
あいつバカだからな。俺たちみたいに誰かに聞こうって発想がないのかもしんねえぞ。
探しに。
I felt uneasy not being with Rimi. I couldn't say for sure that this hospital was safe. If Shogun were reading my mind right now, he would have known that I was here.
そうだな。待つのも飽きたし、タクもあいつがいないと寂しいだろうからな。なあ、 ぶっちゃけリミとはどうなんだ？
え？
付き合ってんのかって聞いてんだよ。お前ら最近結構いい感じじゃね？
付き合ってないよ。
Despite what I'd said, my face was still flushed. Me and Remy dating. It was true that I'd had delusions of that many times. I had been interested in 3D in the past, but nowadays, Remy was becoming more and more important to me with every passing day. As is Ayase and Seina. You've been having some delusions of them too, of the sensual variety. You're finally growing up. You're learning to appreciate 3D in all its curvy glory. But back when Remy had said she'd stay by my side, she also said the following.
そんなの友達だからに決まってるでしょ。
Too bad that's a lie! In other words, she only saw me as a friend. There was no way in hell she'd want to start a romantic relationship with an otaku freak like me. Besides, Remy would probably be a bit slow on the uptake with that kind of thing. I split ways with Misumi-kun and went to look for Remy or Ayase. Misumi-kun had gone downstairs, so I decided to take my search above.
Amisha! Amisha!
I passed by an older patient in the corridor, probably around in his 50s. He was staggering down the hall while calling to someone named Ami-chan over and over. I ignored him and headed farther into the corner. Nobody seemed to mind me wandering around the hospital. Maybe since I used to come here pretty often. But for every corner I turned, and for every door I saw open, I felt my heart rate increase at the thought of Shogun appearing from them. And not only that, but the occasional crazed screams and cries coming from any number of directions weren't exactly good for my mental state. The corridor was uniformly dyed a cream color. Some of the rooms were open, some were closed. And to make sure that there were no signs of Shogun being around, I peeked into a whole bunch of them. Each room had 2 beds lined up next to each other, with person-shaped bulges lying underneath the sheets, likely sleeping patients. But their faces were always in a blind spot, so I couldn't see them. There weren't many people walking through the corridors. Just the man calling for Ami-chan and a single nurse. Those were the only 2 I'd passed by. I didn't really want to be here. I didn't know why, but that feeling refused to leave me. The atmosphere was heavy. It wasn't oppressive, per se, but I had the nagging feeling that I shouldn't have been there. A little farther in front of me, the corridor made a 90-degree turn to the right. Did the hospital rooms continue through there? I wondered. As I pondered that, I cautiously turned the corner. And what's around the corner? A void! And I was immediately met with a wall. It sat in the middle of my path, and in vast contrast to the entirely cream-colored hospital, it was covered in black paint from top to bottom. A complete dead end. For some reason I didn't know, my pulse quickened. I couldn't move even a single step from where I stood. My vision wobbled and shook. Thinking it was vertigo, I tried to close my eyes and massage my eyelids with my fingertips, only to feel my eyeballs twitching beneath them. A chill as cold as ice crawled up from my feet. I stood dead in my tracks, forgetting how to even breathe. staring at the black in front of me. It felt as if it would suck me in, as if it would swallow me whole. A deep, never-ending darkness. Even though there shouldn't have been anyone there, it felt like somewhere someone was watching me. God's gaze pierced into the nape of my neck. Its presence was on a completely different level compared to how it would be at my base. Don't look. Mustering all my mental strength, I managed to close my eyes. I was finally able to breathe again, and I stepped back while gasping for breath. With my head facing down toward the ground, I fled through the corridor. I sped back to the floor of Ayase's room, gasping and wheezing all the way. I touched the nape of my neck and felt sticky sweat oozing from it. But the sweat wasn't just coming from there. My entire body was drenched in it. What the hell was going on? Was Shogun reading my mind? The presence of God's gaze wouldn't go away. My wheezing and shivering refused to calm down. Exhaustion had devoured my motivation in an instant. I wanted to go home. I wanted to have Rimi take care of me as we locked ourselves in my base. It wasn't like me visiting Ayase would make her happy. If anything, it would probably do the complete opposite. I was an idiot for coming along with Misumi-kun. The guy clearly had an agenda, and it was at complete odds with me. I had no reason to be here. I should just go home, for either Shogun or Yua appeared. They always appeared whenever I least expected it. I bet they'd pinned down where I was with ease. No matter where I was, I needed to be prepared. Tracing the wall with my hand, I staggered my way to Yase's hospital room. Had Misumi-kun gotten back yet? Hoping he found Rimi, I dragged my legs forward. I'm willing to bet Yase's probably back, though.
Yamai-sanがまたアミーちゃんっていう名前を呼んでたんですよ。
I heard the voice of a nurse coming from ahead. Looking up, I saw that the two of them were walking my direction. One was young, and the other was a well-built middle-aged lady.
一体誰のことを探してるのか。
それ、この病院に伝わる怪談よ。誰も知らない幻の病室があって、そこにアミーちゃんが入院してるらしいわ。
Phantom hospital room. Was that what I was looking at?
もう何年も前からある噂。
I looked back down and waited for the two to pass by. I held my breath to hide my ragged breathing. I could easily tell they were giving me suspicious looks, but they still ignored me all the same. After the two nurses passed me, I continued my endeavor and arrived at the nurses' station. I must have missed Ayase's room, as it should have been a bit before. Clicking my tongue, I wiped the sweat off my forehead. It still felt like I was being watched. The depths of my chest throbbed with pain. My ears were ringing too. I felt absolutely terrible. My body was a total wreck. I hadn't felt anything like this at all when I first got here. What the hell happened to me in my body? With the pain overwhelming me and becoming too much to bear, I went to ask for help from the nurses at the nurses' station. But there was only one nurse there. We keep running into each other a lot, don't we? You're everywhere. She didn't seem to have noticed me. Her back was turned to me, and she was mumbling something while deeply absorbed in whatever she was working on. In her hand was a clipboard. She was writing something on the form stuck to it.
信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ、信仰の救いあれ。
Nurse lady, I got a question. Are you, by any chance, a follower of those religious cults I've been hearing about on and off that have recently formed in Shibuya? And it's the divine light, you say. Same the divine light here that the Nozomi guys had mentioned before. I'd seen this person many times before. She was that one nurse, Hazuki-san. Oh. This was the AH Tokyo General Hospital psychiatry ward. Of course she'd be here. She'd already attended me twice in the past month alone. Oh man, this is perfect. If I called out to her, surely she'd help me with whatever I... An urgent-sounding ringing noise suddenly rang throughout the room. Uh-oh. Looks like a patient's probably having some problems. Hazuki-san put down her clipboard in surprise, then operated a switch with her hand. The ringing sound was cut off. She'd probably been paid to do some nursing thing, as she rushed out of the nurse's station in a flurry. Why hadn't she noticed me? Even though I was suffering from so much pain right behind her. Probably because you were right behind her. It's not like she's got eyeballs in the back of her head, last I checked. I could barely stay standing. The vertigo was awful. With no other choice, I decided to go to the nurse's station to wait for someone to get back. I want to know what she was writing on, personally. I found a stool around where Hazuki-san had been standing, then sat down. My head ached. It felt like it had been back when the earthquake hit a week ago. But this pain had a different nature to it. Or so it felt, anyway. I needed something to drink. Just trying to breathe hurt my throat, likely because of all the gasping and wheezing I'd been doing. I casually looked around the area. My eyes then landed on the clipboard Hazuki-san had been holding. And the very next moment, what was scrawled on it entered my field of vision. What the hell? That's the crew fiction doodle. Whenever I'd gone in for a checkup, Hazuki-san had always been writing something on that clipboard of hers, all while having the same gentle smile on her face. I thought that she'd been writing down the prescription she planned on giving me, my temperature, things like that. That was why. What was drawn there was beyond my comprehension.
これって
I had seen it before. I had already seen this shittily drawn sketch somewhere before. But where? Where had I seen it? My head ached. A stabbing pain pierced through it. The hairs on the nape of my neck stood on end. Don't look at me! I clicked up the clipboard. Countless medical forms were clipped onto it. I went to flip up the page. The second piece of paper had the same shitty drawing. I flipped to the next page. The third was also the same. and the 4th, and the 5th, and the 6th. Each and every one of them had the same drawing scribbled on it. Again and again and again. This drawing was the crucifixion. Well, I guess I was right to be suspicious about that one instance where I caught her with the doll eyes of unhappiness after all. Well, look who it is, and you have the doll eyes of unhappiness. Should I be scared? Turns out she's actually a little cuckoo upstairs. They're letting the nut run the nut house in the psych ward at the hospital. Something has gone very wrong within the hospital bureaucracy, clearly. Well, clearly attempting to visit Ayase was a complete bust, since we're already back here and all that. I think I'll go ahead and end things here, though. I think, to me, the biggest revelation of all, if you can even call it that, it's more so just a deep suspicion I'm holding, is that Suwa might be our Darth Spider figure. And so, if he's Darth Spider, and he's had something to do with those thugs with both those thugs that was sent to Takami's way at one point before getting killed in the manner that they did, and then everything that happened over at O-Front. That would then mean that Suwa is the new gen culprit. And as I said before, if that's the case, then that would definitely explain the inconsistencies with the crucifixion case within the police files that we saw in that report a while back, as well as maybe some of his other scenes I remember him in a while back, like him interrupting Bon the way he did when trying to draw attention to the group dive that building within the group dive video. There's probably other instances I'm forgetting too. If he's the culprit, then being part of the investigation team, he would be in the best possible place to manipulate the actual investigation behind the New Gen murders. Because he'd be at the crime scenes, he would be within the investigation unit, he would have access to the police files and reports that the entire investigation team has, so he could alter whatever he would need to alter in order to lead everybody astray, cover his tracks basically, as he does what the hell he's seeking to do. And yet, Bond suspects that there's more than one culprit. But I don't remember seeing anything that... No, I don't remember seeing anything at any point that really could hint towards that. At least I don't think. The only thing I can think of that might serve as a hint towards that, towards there being more than one culprit, is how some of the killings either use the phrase "whose eyes are those eyes," and then there's the 7th case with the Dokun message being put on those guys' foreheads, and then Of course, that one lady whose hand was sent into our freaking base. Several of the later murders were, I guess you could say, were targeted towards Takumi in some fashion. But all the ones prior to that, on the other hand, I don't remember ever seeing anything that was reported in the crimes themselves or in the crime scenes or anything like that. That even hints toward any kind of message being directed towards Takumi. This is the only thing I can think of that could hint that there's more than one culprit. One culprit is murdering people in order to send messages to Takumi, while the other one before then wasn't. But I think I need more than that in order to be certain. Just like I need more evidence than a ringtone in order to finger Suwa as a culprit of some sort, or the culprit, whichever. Assuming there's only one culprit, and that Bon is wrong about there being multiple. All I have are vague clues, and in Suwa's case, a deep suspicion. I don't have anything concrete. But all the same, though, I have a feeling that I should listen to this suspicion of mine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading too deeply into this, and it's just pure coincidence that Suwa has a Darth Spider ringtone. I mean, this thing's basically... That thing is... I mean, what do you call them? Spark Wars? This Spark Wars thing is basically this universe's equivalent to Star Wars. And, well... Yeah, I could totally imagine... Yeah, I mean, there's definitely got to be more than one person here in Shibuya who's probably a fan of that sort of thing. So, I mean... If a single ringtone in of itself is enough to warrant someone as being suspicious of, to warrant someone getting the suspicious glare of being a new gen culprit, then I would need to apply that. I would need to apply that to the next person who has a Darth Spider ringtone, whoever they may be. Even if they're someone who, as far as I'm aware, have no possible means of being connected to the crimes at all. Like, maybe they have an alibi, or maybe they're... I don't know. I don't know. Point is, I need more proof. That either proves or disproves this suspicion I have. This theory about Suwa. Other than that, well, obviously the two other big details that we came across in this episode that I definitely think are worth some serious pondering are, number one, the drawing that Takumi discovered behind his essay paper, which I think we've been seeing in delusion triggers all this entire time, little bits of it. And if that's the case, then whatever it is depicted in that picture is clearly very, very important. Could be this whose eyes are those eyes monster that he was talking about in the essay, for all I know. And if that's the case, then, well, we at least have a rough idea of what that monster might actually look like. And then finally, of course, there was the doodle that that the nurse lady has. Hakano. I can't ever remember her name. Yeah, her having all those doodles, and the chant that she was, and the freaking thing she was chanting while she was drawing those doodles. I mean, I think that should be pretty obvious to everyone. That already makes her deeply suspicious. But of course, the million-dollar question from this little thing is, why does she? How does she know about that drawing? Oh. Well, wait a minute. No, she can't be. She can't be Shogun. No way. It's probably more than likely that she's being influenced in some way. I wonder if that drawing too, is some kind of subliminal message being directed to Takumi. Probably by Shogun. I have a shit ton of uncertainties here, more than I would like to have. I really, really, really would like to have some more concrete evidence, information, whatever, of something, so I can at least feel like as though half the stuff I'm talking about right now is more grounded in something firm, you know? Anyway, I said I was going to end this, so I should end it. I hope you guys enjoyed this latest episode of Chaos Head Noah. If you did and you want to see more content from me, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Take care.